Hello and welcome to the latest webinar as part of the Innovative Law Practice Techniques series. Before I turn things over to David Roof, I have one quick announcement. Immediately following the presentation, we will transition to a Q&A segment where I will open the floor for any questions. Please enter your questions into the question box in the GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen during or after the presentation. I will address all questions at the end of the presentation. With that, I'd like to welcome David Roof, the organizer of this session, who will provide some background info on the LPM series and introduce today's speaker. David?
Yes, thank you very much, Austin. My name is David Roof. I'm the chair of the American Bar Association Law Practice Division Legal Project Management Interest Group, and we are producing this webinar today. We're very grateful to have Jim Hannigan presenting on legal standards today. Jim has served since 2010 as a project manager for Fenwick & West business model innovation initiatives in areas such as project management, pricing, process improvement, and resource management. He is a specialist in information management and business strategy as it relates to the legal industry. Prior to joining Fenwick, Jim received his MBA in finance from New York University in 2001. And an MILS from the University of Michigan in 1994, and a BA in English and Business from Indiana University in 1992. He was a product manager for Bloomberg Law's dockets and court data product, responsible for business strategy and technical development. He's also acted as a product liaison and advocate to clients, management, and support staff. Finally, Jim is also a contributing member of our ABA Legal Project Management Interest Group. And we thank him for taking time today to share information about the standards advancement for the legal industry, also called SALI. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, David. Appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. I'm here to talk about, as you see on the screen, legal service categories of work for better pricing and LPM. And some of you may or may not know what that is, but we're going to dive right in, and I think everyone will understand very fast what we're talking about here. What we'll be covering today, first off, standards, a conceptual basis for standards. You know, just kind of what does that mean? What are standards in a business context? And then next bullet as it applies to legal. How would legal benefit from that, from a standards model? Next, I'm going to talk about SALI, a new organization developed to address the need for more legal standards. More standards in the legal industry. And in particular, the matter category standard, which we'll go into today, and the proof of concept and use cases around the matter category standard. And lastly, related organizations, projects, and initiatives to what SALI is doing around matter category standard. So another thing that a lot of you may be aware of is other groups that are trying to do something similar, and I'm going to talk about how they relate to this. So standards help to make commerce seamless. You know, a lot of the products we buy have inherent specifications that we don't know about, but we know that help us trust them, that we can use them in a way that doesn't require more effort on a buyer's part to make work. So in particular, we're not talking about differentiating features here. So for example, the things that as a buyer I don't care about, standards help for, meaning that, you know, there's aspects of products that really are not important to the client or the buyer that need to work, you know, so that you know, the product can be sold more readily and used more readily, and we want to having a standard around that makes that happen more effectively. Ultimately, there's no real competitive advantage to having all of your aspects of your product be your own, because to have a robust market, you need you know, multiple players who are competing to build something that the buyers will accept. And if it's only one seller, typically that's not really going to find its own market unless they have a captive audience for it. So that's how standards help. Innovation and creativity are hindered because there's no drive to build products around the standard that then improve customers' lives or improve the way they do business or whatever it is that you're buying. Examples, outlets. So, you know, when you buy a power cord, for example, you know, you don't have to worry about if it fits in the outlet you have in your wall, right? Why? Because we have one type of outlet. Now, I know there's different outlets around the world, but at least within the U.S., we have one type of outlet. Screws. I mean, if you buy screws, you have screwdrivers at home. You know they work because you know the type of screw you're buying and what you need, right? So again, it's where one of those things where we all know what the specification is for that small product, but we don't have to worry about researching. We don't have to worry about whether it works, what I've got already at home. Batteries. So you go to the store, you buy certain types of batteries. You don't know what you're going to use them for, but you know you're going to need AA, you're going to need AAA, you're going to need 4-volt, whatever it is, because they're standard type of battery. So again, those are physical products, and I'm going to talk about how a service relates to that. How it's the same concept to have the definition and specification around everyday things that make the business then be able to talk about what the ultimate value is that they're selling, as opposed to explaining what the product is. So in service industries, there's not as many standards that exist. They do exist, though. The reason for it is, I think, that in manufacturing and physical products, it's more readily obvious how standards are helpful. But slowly, over time, service industries are realizing that there's a benefit to a standard for what they deliver. ISO, International Standards Organization, has prioritized services for increased attention in standards. And they define services as a transaction performed at the interface of supplier and customer involving an intangible activity. So essentially, something that's not physically bought and sold, but a service that's done without something in your hand, right? Although you can argue that a legal document is something that's in your hand, but you get the point. They say they have about 700 services standards. That's a lot. I haven't investigated what those typically are, but I do know of a few. So management consultancy has one. That's very interesting, I think, to us, because consultancy is sort of a related industry to legal. And that is kind of getting at what we're getting at with Sally, which is defining what is the service that is sold at the end of the day and the client can expect to receive. Right now, you know, we explain it in our documents, in our pitch materials, and our websites, but it helps to have more robust definition around those things. Financial services has standards on transaction flow and data definition, which is interesting because that is kind of what we're getting at with Sally, which is the data that relates to the work we're doing, defined in a way that's efficiently shared. Now, financial services has a need that's more obvious because they're so data heavy in the work and the product they're selling. So, you know, buying and selling, securities is really ultimately a data act, right? It's, you know, you're going, you're giving an order, you're getting it back, you get numbers, number heavy. Securities are very, very, very well defined. So it's an obvious use case for that, but legal also has a need for that, in which we're going to get into here. So I pulled this quote from Bloomberg Law, Big Law Business article from just a month ago, Best Practices in Developing Alternative Fee Arrangements. And it says, it's been said that data is the new oil, but data is often an untapped asset by law firms and in-house legal departments. Digging into the data associated with how your law firm previously delivered legal services will be subject to the AFA will be helpful in developing a meaningful AFA, and I have that in bold. Consider employing or retaining a data scientist to help you gain meaningful insights about your data. So here, they're making the argument, and I think it's obvious, that to do all these things we want to do in advancing the business of law, you need quality information to make it effective, and not just to make it efficient, but also to get people on board, because once you have strong data makes a powerful argument for things, right? It's hard to make an argument in theory, but you can make an argument with data that, you know, hey, we're great at selling this and doing this because of here's proof, right? So it helps to have the information supporting your arguments. Now, I highlighted data scientists because the reason we have, you know, law firms and others looking for really highly skilled data, PhDs and people with information skills and advanced analytic capabilities, statistical capabilities, because the data is not that good, right? So we have a lot of people investing in resources that help us understand, pull value and insights out of the data we've got, because it's difficult. Why is it difficult? Because it's not structured well. It's really not well defined and not shared. It's not just maybe some firms do it well, maybe some companies do it well on their own, but the others don't. Ultimately, you have to work with other entities and share information efficiently. And to do that, you have to have a single standard for data definition. So where to start in legal? Again, data quality impacts all these things. And there's many more you can argue it impacts, so I just wanted to highlight these. Efficient pricing and RFP response quality. So what this is about is, when you're trying to come to an agreement on a price or responding to a request for work, I think right now a lot of time is spent on defining what is needed, right? So, the buyer and seller come into an agreement on what exactly we're talking about when we talk about what the work we want done is, and that's not efficient, right? Because you're doing it every time, right? You're reinventing the wheel every time you go through this process, and that's because the data supporting it is not standardized, not defined consistently. So, so-and-so client may say this type of work is this, and a law firm says it's another thing slightly different. They may be close, but close isn't good enough, right? So 80% is really not, if it's 80%, you can't trust enough to go with the business decision that you need to make. 100% would be better in the sense that if we all agreed, then we know we're 100% agreement on what we're talking about. Project management, budgets and scope. So budgets all are built off of past work. They should be if you have the data, but that data then needs to be matched the work you're budgeting for. So to do that efficiently, you need to be able to say this type of work was done last month or a year ago. And I know it because we called it this label, which I know what it means. Now I can use this as a template for my new budget. And same with scope. Scope is basically an extension of the budget in the sense of it's defining the work inherent in the budget. So that just flows the same way. So every type of work, every matter type receives its own, could receive its own sample scope, its own. I'll talk about a project, but we did that in a minute. Profitability analysis is another thing that flows out of this. So if you're going to analyze how profitable your business lines are, you need to define them consistently so that you're comparing the same outcomes year over year. So here's an idea and a concept around product definition for legal. So this is an example of, you see what we're calling an SKU example for a nail, and below that is a UPC code. What this is saying is, why not use the same concept used in manufacturing to classify products that they use. So the top SKU is stock keeping unit, and that is basically a numbering system that identifies all the subcomponents of the product. And then a UPC is similar, but UPC is cross business, so every business agrees on what it uses the same UPC number to define a product. The same concept of using codes to identify the subcomponents of a product in a way that makes it much more efficient to define, because it's in one place. It's not scattered through 7 different systems, all these different subcomponents. If you have it in one place, then you can share that data more readily. So SKUs for legal services, here's an example where we're starting to look at like a labor and employment class action case, how you could theoretically code the different drivers of a legal service and use that to standardize the aspects or attributes of the matter. So the left, we have area of law, practice, labor, employment, product, or process. So that's the product and process is what is the act, the work that the lawyer is selling. It may be in any area of law, but a civil court proceeding can, is a civil court proceeding regardless of whether it's employment or securities or patent or whatever it is. So you want to have that separated from the area of law. So that's why you see that here. It's important enough to define on its own. Jurisdiction is always a driver in the use cases we've discussed, and not just jurisdiction of the work, but jurisdiction of the parties. Industry and market, same thing. Another major driver of work that we we buy and sell as legal industry participants. I'm in so-and-so industry. If you have industry experience, that's important to me. So having that piece involved is very, very important. To that end, we have started a new organization dedicated to legal industry standards. It's called SALI, Standards Advancement for the Legal Industry. Independent, not-for-profit member organization formally established almost a year ago And we spent the last year mainly putting together the the kind of rules of the road and involvement, and how what is expected of people that are involved, what they get from it, just defining those sorts of things, so that we were comfortable when we really go looking for people, that they're comfortable with what how they're involved with us. So we have a wide range of stakeholders involved, and you see all here the types: law firms, clients, service providers. That's both technology and also the alternative providers, as we call them. We like to get them involved too. It's not just law firm client, but anybody, any player in legal has a piece of this. And associations, of course. So founding sponsors were LMA and ALA, and we have a formal rollout coming shortly. So you're going to be hearing more publicly. But at this time, we're reaching out to a range of interested organizations to help them express early interest, so to really get the ball rolling. And some of the names you will know when you hear it. So we're very excited about who we got on board. So I'll go into the standard more in a second. I just want to introduce kind of what Sally's about, and then I'll get into the standard that we have developed. But so in terms of that standard, the mission statement is to create a common language of legal services so a user can quickly capture the area of practice, nature of the matter, and the subspecialty, so appropriate business procedures and management can be applied. So basically, it's defining the work in a way that can be used in multiple purposes, and greatly increasing making it more seamless, rather, all the things we need to do around the business of law. And then the practice as well, but the business law is more impacted by this. Other areas to investigate for standards, you can argue that the next step would be, what are the components of each type of product, and what is the scope? Scope is the toughest thing to define. Think about every matter you pitch or or receive a pitch for. Defining the scope is the most difficult, time-consuming thing to do it well, because it's not easy, right? It's not, every matter has its own little nuance. You have to think about all the different issues and varieties of risk, and to do it an original for every matter is not sustainable. So we would like to go down the path of extending this to a generalized scope for each type of matter, and it could be obviously there's going to be deviations from that, but that's the whole point of a project management approach, which is you define kind of the baseline rather, and then you change and edit as needed based on the facts of the work you're talking about. Quality assurance, why not have that be a standard? That's clearly a standard in manufacturing, but there's a quality component to legal, right, that could be defined. And we're not trying to, we're not trying to be domineering here in a sense of, we're demanding these things happen, or that there's better quality. It's more about facilitating these things, because there's clearly a need for it, and people in the industry would prefer to have something they can rely on as a baseline to work. But it takes effort to get that. It takes a lot of coordination for that to happen, to get that trust. So that's what Sally's trying to do. So at high level, this effort is being driven by common vocabularies, or popular phrase for it, across these key disciplines. So pricing and value, project management, efficiency, and marketing. Marketing experience management. That's part of the RFP thing. So how do you define what you've done, what you do, and what you've done in a way that you can turn it around fast? I'll get more into that in a sec. Here's a table that kind of defines the stakeholders and the use case. So I'll go one by one. So on the left is the use case. So procurement would benefit from, as a buyer, the procurement department, more standard RFP. So spending less time trying to define the exact nature of the work they're looking to buy, but having a baseline to then work from. So it takes away the initial, I think, effort of defining something that's done before, right? So hunting down that text, hunting down that that explanation, and just going from, oh, it's this product, but we want it this way, is much faster. And a law firm could respond faster if they know the terms that they're talking about, the exact category we're talking about, a much faster response. And technical solution providers can build systems around that, right? So once we have a common definition around the products, then the sky's the limit for what you can build to support it. And that's kind of what we're looking for there. And pricing. So this is about ultimately performance and outcomes, right? So it's what you ultimately can benefit from it. So as a buyer, once you have a standard way to describe the work you do, the work you want rather, you can then start to do metrics around the results because you defined it in a way that allows for that data analytics. It's more effective than doing the ad hoc way now we have. Same for law firms, and again, performance. So we can say, well, for these 5 products, we get outcome so-and-so 99% of the time. That's hard to do now because the matters are too fragmented in their definition. Solution providers then again can build more products around that. So there's lots of opportunity here for all players to benefit once we have the standard in place. In terms of project management, again about analytics and outcomes. So how well do we manage what we say we're going to manage, and that again needs common definition around the data because data is the only way to do that effectively. You can't prove. You can use anecdotal evidence, but to have data that supports your arguments about how well work is managed or the change management happens, how well the budgets are kept to. You need data to be strong. You need the data to be robust. And once again, more opportunity for providers to build around that. So the coding system provides a common vocabulary for delivering the value. And that's where the benefit we're seeing. And all key stakeholders involved will make it happen because without any one key player, more likely failure will happen because you need everybody kind of. I don't want to. The common term is kumbaya, right? Meaning everyone's holding hands and working together. What we mean by that is we're on the same page. I'm going to put it more in blunt terms. If we're on the same page about the terms that we're talking about, then we can go do our own competitive, add our own competitive advantage, our own value, because we're not trying to, come to an understanding about what we're talking about to begin with. So these are kind of use cases. I'm going to go into them more in detail in a sec, but at a high level, marketing, staffing is another one that I haven't gotten to yet. The timekeepers and what they worked on. Do we have people that worked on this type of product and how much? We have that now, but it's again fragmented, disjointed. And if you have fragmented, disjointed data, you're not gonna use it much because it's too much time to fix it. It takes too much time to fix it. Without the matter type, hard to do. So let's go through some of these. Number one, determine the department external provider experience from a request of service. What experience does our department or provider have with handling the type of matters, our success rate? So I've thought about this before, but it's very basic. It's defining the projects in a consistent way, and then you can start to track success and start to track outcomes more readily. That's something that we don't do enough of because, again, the underlying data is not clean enough to make that something that we have to spend more time cleaning up than what we have. Second question, how much of our attorneys have the most experience? And this could be internal or external, buyer, seller, client, law firm, has the most experience different types of matters. So again, using that data to match up with attorneys that have worked on it, and you can really understand, as opposed to their verbal defense or explanation what they've done, get actual facts and data to support that. So budgeting and pricing. What's the average price for this service? What's the average cost? Whatever angle you're looking at it. Very straightforward. This is when pricing it's not as simple as one would think in terms of pricing, where it's, I have this type of matter, what's the cost? Because types of matters can then vary greatly. And some of the attributes of the standard address those, some don't. I mean, some of it gets into scope, right? So, but this is a starting point. So if patent litigation costs such and such, then you can ask the question, well, how much depth did you go into in those matters? What was the expectation for the sub-deliverables in terms of what how much time, how much effort was put into them. Those kinds of questions then could be started to address, which aren't now because they're impossible to begin to talk about them without the common language. Number 4, experts. Same thing. Experts for attorneys. What types of matters have you been involved in? And then lastly, for knowledge management, look, model documents and data, supporting, a practice. How do you integrate all that more effectively? Right now, it's a lot of manual search. It's a lot of phone calls and PTI emails around. But really, it's not. If you have data that is attached to these things, tagged well, then it's much more easy to find it, and you're a more productive shop. I'm going to get into this one too, profitability. So, it's another area where, and in terms of from the in-house perspective, it could be just return on investment, and from law firm perspective, profitability in a business sense. But you need to define the products well to track them, right? So think about if you look at a financial report from a public company, they have product lines that they explain their profitability. Very straightforward, right? It's maybe 3 or 4 lines. Legal can't do that. Legal, it's by practice group, which kind of says some of it, but not all of it. And you don't have much more than that. But examples here, litigation, a patent troll is a product line, patent troll case. So, if I defend a lot of big clients against patent trolls, that's a product line. Competitor patent, same thing. If I defend a lot of clients against competitive lawsuits, that's a product line. In M&A, I specialize in such and such type of industry for deals, right? That's a product line. But having these data points defined makes it so that you can then go collect data information around your practice that you can then use to sell and market yourself. So consistent high quality data at the project level is needed for any form of sophisticated profitability analysis to be undertaken. So without it, you're really just you're trying to find nuggets out of junk, essentially. If you do it once, and then you have to update it yourself later, where you take all the data that exists and you try and provide your own overlay to it. Ideally, it just be there for you to use. So the goals for the matter categories and the codes relating to them are these. Open, so free and available. This is not about any business any business model here. This is about making the industry more efficient. Industry driven. So we need to have the players engaged, involved, and supportive, and knowing that what they're offering will be used wisely and to their benefit. Universal, balanced approach. So no one type of stakeholder really dominates. That's easier said than done because it's just nature of groups that somebody will the more powerful voice could lead the discussion, but having an organization behind it that is monitoring that is essential in order to make sure the outcome is ultimately benefits all. Hierarchical, so multiple layers of specificity. You need to have more flexibility around what the components are. So not everybody's going to be happy or 100% board with every single piece of the standard, but if you have enough of it, then they can go off and do their own, and that's what Extensible is about, do their own sort of overlay to it. So we know that a lot of law firms and clients do their own coding systems, and there may be 10 to 20% of it, maybe there's a valid reason for it because it's specific to their work. We don't want to restrict that. We want to make it so that that's more, we facilitate that. So if we have a common baseline that everyone agrees to, then everything after that can be, every organization can do what they want. But if we all have the same common language, it's sort of like, think of a language itself. So, we all agree on the English language, its basic components, but we may have, different cultures may have its own way of dialects or its own way of, its own way of delivering that. So same concept here. We want to ultimately have it be where the value is derived from the standard, but we don't want to restrict further extensions of it for other purposes that we don't know about or they are not relevant to the broad group. Practical. So this is a key one in terms of implementation. You know, it's got to be able to be easily implemented for usage, right? So we don't want to make it so we build a standard that then no one can use, and because it's too hard to actually make practical. And that has to, well, that was another reason to bring in the broad stakeholders so that they can give us that advice, right? So they bring the reality to it. And then lastly, accessible. So using APIs is a way to make it so that everyone can see it and use it, and without having to have too much, friction around communication. So we're going to be moving to that platform soon. Right now, we've been working out of Word docs and spreadsheets, and that's not ultimately going to work for a bigger group. So that's the plan. So here are the key dimensions that the standard contains. So product, service, area of law, and parties are the core components of the standard, and what you need to exist to have the matter be fully data-based. Attributes mean they could be aspects of the work and actually its dimensions. So location, jurisdiction, like I said, can apply to multiple things. Same for industry. But these are things that I know this may not sound sophisticated, but to build them all together is more sophisticated. Right now, we do these things as separate data points. We do them or we combine them. They may be combined, depending on what they are. But having them as one whole and one integrated whole means that they relate to each other, and they can be more easily utilized for multiple purposes rather than having them as separate data points that may or may not get used. So here's an example with that for labor and employment. So practice, area of law, you break out into employment. Process, service, and product is litigation with these subcomponents. The parties, industry, market, number 3, and jurisdiction. So here's where kind of how you break down a matter and look at its pieces and say, this is the pieces I need to have to make my matter fit into the model. And again, it's about coming up with the categories that actually are important, so that we get a lot of people say, well, I don't want to code too much. That's true, but we just find the sweet spot between what we need versus overkill. Then we're good. So the product and process levels, we have 4. And here's the levels are not yet, the lower levels have not yet been addressed by the group, but other groups are doing it. But the top level, and I'll get to some examples in a sec, is really the very high level type of service that a legal provider would offer. And then we have 4. We have disputes, so it's all kinds of litigation, arbitration, transactions, so any type of agreement that's not adversarial necessarily. Third is regulatory, so regulatory action, so government. And fourth is bankruptcy or a wind down of some that type of thing to be worth its own. The second level is naming the bucket within those that describes a set of phases or deliverables that are most commonly associated together for that activity. And you'll understand this in a sec when I show you examples. Third then is the next phase of that, which is all the subcomponents of that top level. So here's an example of a private placement financing. So remember I said the top level was the 4 categories. You see number 1, transaction. And then below that, level 2, private placement for equity. So that's the product within transaction that we're talking about here. Could be, an M&A deal. It could be a licensing agreement. The third level then is all the deliverables. And these are where the kinds of things you see in a budget typically for a private placement. So collect and store documents, letter of intent, due diligence, all those things is how this product typically is subcategorized for the work. So we may all do this the same way. Us, meaning anybody on this call that is engaged in this type of service, may already do this, call these things. But what if we use the word due diligence phase? I'm sorry, due diligence work instead of phase, that makes it a different data point. Even if it's the same concept, the slight wording difference makes it not the same. And that's what we're talking about here. We may all be 80, 90% in agreement on what it is, but if you don't call it the same, then you can't get the value out of the data. So that's where the key is just coming up with the common name and also the definition. So you may not agree with the definition behind these. And that's where Sally can help facilitate broad agreement on what these consist of. Maybe these are obvious, maybe they're not. And then scope is another aspect of that as well. A class action product liability dispute, same thing, top level dispute. Level 2 is a civil court proceeding. Could be other types of criminal, like I said, arbitration, et cetera. Then the deliverables for that are, as you see here, and you may have seen these already in your practice, early case assessment, discovery, trial, summary judgment, whatever it is, settlement. If you don't call them the same, then you can't share the data efficiently. You can't say, oh, it's like this, trust me. No, you have to be able to rely on data, you have to understand exactly what's behind it, to trust it, really. So there's another thing we've seen is, really there's a timing issue that people may be concerned about. And what that relates to is, this data may not always be known right off the bat, right? So the matter starts or may change. So matter starts, it comes in, may know some components, you may not know the other parties, you may not know what venue will be ultimately in, but you can start, right? So there's no rule that says it has to be known from the beginning. And also we know that, we don't have the best data practices right now for intake. Basically the reason for that is because there hasn't been a driving need for it. Now we're seeing one. And Sally can help facilitate that too, because if you don't have a burning business need for it, then there's not any incentive to make the data strong. So ultimately the point of this slide is to say that we realize that this occurs, and the goal of the standard can be evolved. So it can be fleshed out over time and edited as needed. There's no requirement that it's all perfect from day one, nor should it be. And we hope that, and it actually makes, if you look at your process mapping around this type of stuff, it is better that it takes time. You don't want it to all have to be done in one day because it's probably not going to be good data, right? Ideally, it's over time. This is managed and curated so that you're confident in what's in there. And the best way to do that is to have multiple touch points where you do your editing and do your updating as information comes in, but also just to make sure it's correct. So another question we have is, I know others are doing this, and how does Sally fit in? So I wanted to just touch on some of those. And I'm involved in each one of these to some extent, in different capacities. But what I'm seeing is more and more people are talking together about it, so we're not off doing our own thing. But a lot of individuals involved in these initiatives do realize this and are very cognizant of the fact that we want people to be comfortable with what they're contributing to will be broadly accepted. And to do that, you have to have really a good collaboration. So LEADS is the standards body, the setting body really for e-billing protocols. And I'm recently became a board member there, and I'm very excited about their openness to any standard that advances. They're really about making sure that the work happens more efficiently. That's all their main concern is. That's all our main concern is. And invoicing is one key part of that. Invoicing is, at the end of the day, what the client sees, and they want it to be right. But everything that leads up to invoicing is important too. And that that's where other standards may help and be kind of supportive of that goal. The ABA project to overhaul task codes, David alluded to earlier, is another one that this is kind of when everyone thinks of this topic, this is what the first thing comes to mind is the task codes, UTBMS set. And Sally's not about overhauling that. We really see a complementary role here. we focused on the top level, which is, the matter category thing I've been talking about. This project is about the deliverables within them, and I'm involved in this as well, and I definitely see a nice merging of the minds here, where ultimately whatever we come up with the ABA, Sally will be able to hopefully help promote and utilize. So the key though is just to make sure that we're all kind of marching in lockstep to the same goal, which is shared common standard definitions. And as long as we're not walking at each other and doing the same thing, I think that will work. Another one I was involved in, which was a short-term project, was for the clock organization, a deliverable framework around patent prosecution. So this was, you can go on the website and find it. It's up there for the whole thing's there for you to use. That was really digging in getting the weeds in patent prosecution for the 3 levels I talked about, the second level and the third, the deliverables, the phases, and then sub-deliverables, and defining them, the scope. And it takes, to get at that level, it takes a lot of subject matter experts, a lot of different stakeholders who touch the data that's surrounding it and make sure that their needs are met, because it's not just an academic exercise. It's not about what does this work entail from a legal perspective. It's also, how does it fit into the business side? And that's the key part that's sometimes missing, or vice versa. So the clock initiative was about, for patent prosecution, coming up with a framework that everyone agreed on, definition, scope, and naming conventions. And then we also tied it to the UTVMS set for mapping, so people can understand kind of how it fits into what they know already. And that's all up on that website there, clock.org. And I recommend you check it out to see kind of, if you want to pick a topic and really kill it, as they say. That's an example of it. We spent about 6 to 12 months on it with regular phone calls and regular edits and updates, and hammered it out, and a broad group of stakeholders involved, and really effective kind of a model for how to do this.